Hey guys, tonight we travel back, way back, to the ancient banks of the Nile, not in Egypt, but a little further south, into the golden dust and sun-baked villages of Nubia. It's dry, it's warm. There's the earthy smell of clay ovens and roasting grain in the air. You've got mud between your toes and a pot balanced on your hip. You're about to make a batch of beer so thick you can almost chew it, and so sacred it gets offered to the gods before it touches anyone else's lips. You probably won't survive this, mostly because the brewing aunties here don't suffer fools, and they've been doing this since before the pyramids had names. If you drop a jar or stir counterclockwise, there will be muttered curses, possibly in Meroitic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside the Nile, and it's not the sprawling, crocodile-filled river you may be picturing. It's gentle here, forked into canals and shallows, rimmed with reeds that rustle like gossip. Your hands are deep in a woven basket of emmer wheat. The grains have been soaked for 2 nights, just long enough for tiny sprouts to poke out like sleepy eyelashes. They're warm and damp, smelling slightly sweet, almost like a fresh loaf that hasn't decided if it's bread yet. This is the start of Nubian beer. Before the bubbling vats and clay pots, before the flavor debates and goat-related mishaps, it starts here, with emmer. Emmer wheat is hardy, tough. It grows where other grains shrug and give up. Nubians figured out early that if you soak it, sprout it, mash it, and warm it just right, it produces sugars that yeast finds irresistible. No modern thermometers, no stainless steel, just hands, sun, patience, and the occasional duck feather floating by. You stir the basket's contents gently, lifting the sprouts, letting water drip down your arms. The older woman beside you grunts her approval. Her name's probably something like Tekeya or Mire, and she has never, not once, measured anything with a stick or a scale. She knows, by smell, by sight, by the way the millet shifts in the breeze, probably. Historians still argue whether the brewing knowledge came northward from Nubia into Egypt, or the other way around. Some say both cultures borrowed from even older African traditions that are now little more than whispers in pottery shards. What we do know is that the Nubians had beer not just early, but proudly. There's even evidence they were spiking their beer with antibiotics centuries before modern science caught on. But for now, you're just trying to keep the grain from sloshing out of your basket. As Tekeya moves on to the next phase, she carries the sprouted mash into a sunlit courtyard, cracked mud underfoot, a few cats lounging in shade, and lays it on flat reed mats. Here it will rest for a few hours, maybe a day, until it's just right. Not too dry, not too wet. It needs to hit that sweet spot where sugar dreams are made. The village around you hums with the quiet chaos of daily life. A child chasing a goat, 2 elders trading barbs over whose daughter-in-law burned the porridge, someone hammering clay into shape behind a veil of smoke. And somewhere, a jar tips over with a thud and someone yells, but not angrily. Brewing in Nubia is a community ritual. Everyone knows their part. Once the grain is dry, you'll pound it. Not in a machine or a press, but with a long wooden pestle and a stone bowl the size of a laundry basket. You'll take turns, your shoulders working in rhythm, dust kicking up around your ankles. The smell? It's earthy and rich, like warm oatmeal with a hint of toast. And here's the charming fringe detail. Some households flavor their beer by tossing in dried dates or fig scraps. Others swear by crushed carob pods. One particularly bold family even tries acacia flowers. No one agrees on the best addition, but they all insist their version is the only one that keeps the ancestors happy. You finish grinding and sift the coarse flour into a bowl. The air is thick now, scented with dust and sun-baked grain. A dog stretches under a sycamore tree. Somewhere, a pot starts to bubble. The brew day is far from over, but you're already a little buzzed on the scent, the heat, and the rhythmic comfort of the task. Soon, you'll mix the flour with water again, this time for boiling. Then the real fermentation starts. But for now, Takea hands you a clay cup. No handle, chipped edge, and it's full of something warm, sweet, and cloudy. It's yesterday's batch, a little sour, a little fizzy, and strong enough to make your toes curl. You drink. It's not what you're used to, nothing crisp, nothing filtered, but it's alive, bubbling, intense, and somehow familiar, like you've tasted this before, somewhere far back, maybe in a dream. The courtyard is still warm beneath your feet, as the shadows stretch longer, curling into corners and sneaking up the walls like sleepy cats. You're standing near the brewing hut now, a low, slightly uneven structure patched with mud and thatch. Its roof slanted like it's been thinking hard about collapsing for decades, but hasn't quite committed yet. Inside, it smells like steam, smoke, and old secrets. You duck through the narrow doorway and are instantly hit with a wall of humid air and roasted grain. In the center of the room, half a dozen wide-bellied clay jars bubble faintly, each perched over a slow flame or nestled in glowing embers. One lets off a quiet bloop every few seconds. Another fizzes like it's remembering something funny. You wipe your forehead and try not to trip over the firewood stacked like a miniature log maze. Takea is here too, of course, her back bent over a simmering pot, adding in the ground malt from earlier. Her hands working with the kind of confidence that only comes from doing something every day for decades, sometimes by lantern light, sometimes with a toddler strapped to your back, and often while arguing with your sister about whether the beer needs more time or just more nerve. This is the heart of Nubian brewing. The clay jars, the heat, the low murmurs of generations. The jars themselves are large, reddish-brown, and slightly asymmetrical, which makes them look like they're trying to lean in and hear the gossip. Some have etched markings, some have layers of soot caked around their bottoms from years of use. Each one has a personality. Takea claims hers knows when you're being lazy. You kneel next to a vessel and peek inside. The brew is thick, more porridge than liquid at this stage, swirling with softened grain and a caramel tint that catches the light like molten bronze. It's not boiling, exactly, just shuddering, like it's deciding whether to bubble or wait. Outside, a rooster crows, late, confused, but committed. You can hear children laughing and the slap-slap of wet laundry against stone. Someone starts humming. In a place like this, everything is sound. Nothing mechanical, nothing industrial. Just breath, fire, water, and the low percussion of daily life. Takea dips a ladle into the pot and offers it to you without looking. You take a sip. It's hot, faintly sweet, and already a little sour. The flavor riding that narrow balance between funky and refreshing. It clings to your tongue and settles in your chest like a warm memory. This batch still has a few stages to go, but you're already starting to get it. This isn't just a drink, it's a rhythm, a relationship. Historians still argue whether Nubian beer production was centralized or primarily domestic. Some believe there were official breweries for state or temple use, staffed by professionals. Others argue it was mostly household-driven, with skilled women like Takea holding the real knowledge, passed down not through scrolls or carvings, but by doing. By showing your niece how to stir, by whispering to the jar like it's listening, by knowing when to open the hut's single crooked window for better airflow. And speaking of airflow, whoosh. A gust enters through that window now, knocking some drying herbs off their perch and sending a little ash dancing into your pot. Takea scowls, plucks the offending leaf out with a practiced hand, and mutters something about weather spirits with no manners. Here's a fringe detail for your dreams tonight. Some Nubians believed that spirits, actual spirits, could influence the fermentation process. A misbehaving batch wasn't just a mistake, it was an omen. You had to ask forgiveness, or bribe the spirits with a little extra honey, or sacrifice your best cup and not complain when the dog licks the foam off it later. Your own batch is now simmering slowly. You stir with a wooden paddle, its edge darkened from use, and watch the grain swirl like a slow-moving galaxy. The emmer is breaking down, releasing its sugars into the mixture. This is where yeast will eventually do its magic. But don't say that word too loudly. Takea still insists the bubbles come from the beer spirit waking up. Outside, a breeze carries the scent of wood smoke and baking flatbread. You hear a voice call for Takea, probably someone's cousin or sister-in-law who wants to borrow a little starter, which usually means she's about to show up with 3 empty pots and a very loose definition of return dates. You take this moment to breathe in deeply. The brewing hut is full of memory. Not yours, but the kind you're allowed to borrow. The walls are streaked with soot and handprints. The roof creaks with familiarity. And those jars? They're talking to each other, low and slow, like old women who've seen too much to be surprised by anything. You glance at your own jar again. A small froth is starting to form around the edges. The brew's color is darkening to a shade somewhere between amber and stormy tea. Takea nods approvingly. You're learning. Don't let it boil too fast, she warns, or it'll taste like burnt bread and shame. Noted. She pulls a lid over her pot and sighs. Outside, dusk begins to settle, soft and honey-colored, and the day exhales. Another batch underway. Another quiet victory. In a few days, this jar will be lifted and poured. Maybe at a feast, maybe as a gift, maybe just to pass around between sisters after the kids fall asleep and the goats stop yelling. But tonight, it's just bubbling clay, warm air, and the low, steady sound of something ancient, something alive, rising through the steam. The night settles deep around the village like a soft wool cloak, and the sky above you is impossibly clear. Stars blink down with an ancient kind of patience. You've stepped back outside the brew hut to catch a breath and stretch your legs, only to find yourself drawn toward another courtyard, lit by the flickering glow of oil lamps and fire embers. This is where you meet them, the brewmaster aunties of the Kingdom of Kush. There are 4 of them sitting in a semicircle like queens without thrones, each with a mug in hand, each with feet dusty and bare. They talk with their hands, their eyes, their elbows. Their laughter rolls like thunder in a very small storm cloud. One of them snorts. Another claps the knee of the youngest. And you realize quickly, these women do not mess around. One is shelling nuts into a wide bowl. Another is plaiting her hair with dyed beads that catch the firelight like tiny suns. They all know your name before you introduce yourself. You suspect they knew you were coming before you knew. You sit. It's the only respectful option. One pushes a clay cup into your hands before you even find words. It's warm and tart and smells faintly of tamarind. This one's light, she says, for babies and gossip. They all laugh again. Here's the thing. In Nubian culture, especially during the Kingdom of Kush era, beer wasn't some fringe culinary experiment. It was a pillar of meals, of medicine, of ritual, and yes, of social life. It wasn't brewed in shadows, or by the fringe of society. It was handled, managed, crafted, and defended by women. And these women here? They are the keepers of recipes you'll never find on papyrus or etched in stone. Historians still argue whether the power of these brewing women extended into formal priesthoods or ritual councils. There are hints, murals, figurines, burial goods, that suggest women with brewing knowledge held spiritual or ceremonial weight. Some argue the real power of a priestess wasn't in the temple, but in the pot. You sip again and listen as one of the aunties, her name might be Wari, or maybe she just doesn't want to tell you, begins telling a story. It starts with a grain of emmer, she says. Not just a seed, but a choice. A seed that wakes when soaked, breathes when crushed, transforms when warmed. Like people, she chuckles. Some of us don't become who we're meant to be until things get a little heated. They all nod. Wari tells you about the brewing calendar. Not kept in scrolls, but in smells, stars, and stomachs. Certain batches are better when started during the waning moon. Others thrive when the air is thick with dust. The yeast listens to the wind, she says, with complete seriousness. One of the younger women, who's been quiet up until now, leans forward. She's got a mischievous glint in her eye. Tell them about the beer duel. More laughter. Apparently, some years ago, two families in the village had a not-so-small disagreement about who made the best millet beer. It escalated, very politely, of course, into a taste-off judged by the entire village, including the priest. According to legend, one batch was so good that a goat refused to leave the cup alone and had to be physically escorted from the scene. The losing brewer? She claimed the yeast had been cursed by a passing stranger. It was later revealed the stranger was her cousin trying to swipe some extra date syrup. Fringe detail, yes, but not unusual. Brewing was serious, but also communal drama in the best way. The pride, the rituals, the gossip, it all fermented together. One of the aunties, her teeth stained slightly from tamarind and thyme, leans toward you. Every woman here has a brewing story, she says. Mine is the time a monkey stole the mash and got stuck in a tree. You are desperately hoping she's exaggerating. You suspect she's not. The conversation drifts, like the firelight, like the yeast itself, from brewing to family, to which man keeps pretending he doesn't drink, but always ends up visiting during fermentation day. You learn who always overspices, who under-ferments, and which neighbor secretly prefers Egyptian beer, even though she'll deny it until her last breath. The fire dies low. Your cup is empty. You don't remember finishing it. One of the women is humming now, a soft, low tune with no real words. Or maybe the words are just too old for you to understand. It sounds like a lullaby that also happens to carry fermentation instructions. You imagine babies learning to sleep, and yeast learning to rise to the same melody. This is knowledge kept not in books, but in bone. The brewmaster aunties don't need temperature charts or pH readings. They've watched pots foam just so, smelled when the grain was off, adjusted the brew by instinct. Their techniques, whispered across generations, are more precise than any lab experiment, because they were tested not with metrics, but with memory. You yawn, and someone gently pats your arm. We'll see how you stir tomorrow, one says, teasing. The air is soft now, the stars deeper, the night woven with barley and stories. And the aunties? Still sitting, still talking, still brewing something only they know how to finish. Morning returns without asking, slipping in through the woven reed shutters and curling around your ankles like a curious cat. The air smells faintly of ash and dry grass. You stretch your legs beneath a wool blanket, blink a few times, and find yourself once again in the same warm Nubian village, where brewing isn't so much a profession as a heartbeat. You step outside and find Takea already awake. Of course she is, stooping beneath the hut's eaves with her sleeves rolled up and her hands coated in damp grain. She's spreading the sprouted emmer you helped soak yesterday across a tightly woven mat. It crackles slightly as it touches the morning heat, like it too is waking up. This, she tells you, is malting. It sounds deceptively modern. But the process, spreading the grain, letting it sprout just enough to unlock its sugars, drying it under sun and time, hasn't changed much in thousands of years. No factories, no shiny conveyor belts, just mats, hands, sun, and the instinctive knowledge of when enough is enough. You crouch beside her and help flick away the husks with a small brush made of bundled grass stems. It's peaceful. You can hear the slow clatter of someone feeding chickens nearby, the repetitive crunch of footsteps over sand, and the soft rumble of a donkey complaining about absolutely nothing in particular. As you work, a goat appears. No one invites the goat. It simply shows up, sniffs the drying grain, and makes a slow, suspicious circle before being shooed away by Takeya with a sharp click of her tongue. She mutters something about last time, and you remember, though it's unclear if she's talking to you or the goat. A few feet away, someone is shaking out a reed mat to begin grinding yesterday's dried batch. They use a flat stone, pitted with years of use, and a pestle that's worn down in the middle from the repeated kiss of grain. The motion is hypnotic. Push, grind, scrape, sigh, a rhythm shared across generations. Historians still debate how much of this grain was used for beer versus bread. In truth, the line between the two is so blurred in Nubian kitchens that it's almost silly to separate them. What starts as porridge might ferment into ale. What begins as beer mash could be baked the next day into flatbread, if there's too much humidity or not enough company to drink it all. But today's going all the way. You carry the newly dried malt into the brewing hut, where the smell of yesterday's batch still hangs in the air like old laughter. Takeya instructs you to grind the grains coarsely, enough to expose the starches, but not so much that they become flour. This is harder than it sounds. You end up sneezing grain dust for a solid minute, which earns you an affectionate eye roll and a clean cloth to wipe your face. When the malt is ready, it's mixed with water into a kind of thick, sludgy paste, halfway between soup and wet sand. Takeya tastes it, clicks her tongue, and then adds just a pinch of crushed dates from a nearby gourd. For the spirits, she says, and for flavor, but mostly for the spirits. There's a whisper among older brewers here that if you skip sweeteners, your brew will sour. Not just in flavor, but in luck. One tale tells of a woman who forgot the figs in her ceremonial batch and ended up with an ant invasion so thorough they still refer to it as the March of the Six-Legged Warriors. You help load the mix into a clay pot, bigger than the others, stained from years of use. Takeya wraps her hands around it like it's a sleepy child and lowers it gently into a stone-lined pit already glowing with embers. The heat rises in soft pulses. The mash stews, simmering slowly, never boiling. Too hot, and you kill the yeast. Too cold, and it sulks and does nothing. You must keep it in the sweet spot, that place where science meets intuition and the yeast starts thinking about dinner. Fringe detail. Some Nubian brewers believe you can hear when the mash is ready. Not from bubbling or hissing, but from a subtle shift in pitch, like the way a kettle sings when you're not quite listening. Takeya swears by this. When it hums, she says, you feed it. And feed it you do. Another scoop of date mash, a sprinkle of millet flour, a final stir with a paddle shaped like a canoe oar, broad, smooth, and carved with symbols you don't recognize but somehow understand. Outside, the heat has climbed. The village hums with its own fermentation. Kids dart between shadows, women carry baskets from hut to hut, and someone's drumming softly. Not for ceremony, just because the day feels like it needs a beat. You sit on a low stool, watch the pot, and try to listen for the hum. It comes eventually, subtle and steady, like a breath between heartbeats. You smile. Takea nods, and together, in the quiet of a sun-warmed hut filled with fire and steam and stories, you start to believe in the oldest magic of all, the kind you can drink. You'd think a brew day would be calm, even meditative, just bubbles, stirring, and the occasional whiff of toasted grain. But you haven't met the full family yet. By late morning, the courtyard is alive. Cousins arrive with extra jugs, elders show up to supervise, and that one neighbor, you know the one, wanders over claiming she's just passing through, but somehow ends up holding the stirring paddle and offering unsolicited advice. Takea rolls her eyes so hard you think you hear a faint clunk. Today's brew has become a group effort, whether you like it or not. The boiling has begun. Well, not quite boiling. You've been reminded, sternly, that too much heat ruins everything. But the mash is bubbling gently now in the large clay pots, nestled snugly among stones. The courtyard smells rich and sharp, like damp bread and sun-scorched honey. Takea adds a sprig of dried herbs to one pot, and immediately her sister gasps. "That's thyme, not holy mint." Takea fires back. "I know what thyme looks like, idiot." Their mother sighs in the background and mutters something about how neither one of them remembers anything properly since they married men who can't even roast a squash. The argument escalates into what you can only describe as a brew day bickerfest. One sister insists the foam should rise no more than a finger's width. Another claims the bubbles should wink at you, not froth like angry stew. A cousin from the next compound swears that if the foam sticks to the sides too long, it means someone in the family is lying. About what? No one says. Meanwhile, your job is to stir. Slowly, evenly, clockwise. Always clockwise. You're told this prevents the beer from turning bitter. One older woman insists that counterclockwise stirring invites scorpions. This seems unlikely, but you are in no mood to test the theory. Historians still argue whether foam height actually indicated alcohol content in Nubian beer, or whether this was a folk belief layered over centuries. What is clear is that brew foam was studied like tea leaves, watched, judged, and sometimes whispered to. You suspect one woman is giving the pot compliments just to make the yeast behave. Your stirring rhythm picks up with the low drone of conversation around you. Someone starts shelling chickpeas. Another cousin arrives with a basket of flatbread and the completely unnecessary claim that her grandmother invented this recipe. Takea doesn't dignify that with a response. She just tilts her head and returns to inspecting her pot like it's a misbehaving toddler. And then, of course, there's the foam incident. It happens quickly. A sudden blorp, a froth surge, and then a dramatic hiss as foam spills over the edge of one pot. Someone shrieks. Someone blames the breeze. Someone blames your stirring, which is frankly rude. You scramble to help scrape down the sides while Takea flaps a cloth at the surface, like she's swatting flies made of yeast. The courtyard turns into a controlled frenzy. Extra grain is tossed in. A lid is half applied, then yanked off again. Someone suggests sacrificing a fig. You're pretty sure someone actually does. The foam settles. The crisis passes. Tea is served. Just regular tea this time. Everyone pretends nothing happened. Fringe brewing belief of the day. If the foam overflows before the sun hits its peak, it means your house will be visited by unexpected guests. Judging by the amount of foam currently dripping down the pot, you'd better make a lot of flatbread. You sit down beside Takea as she wipes sweat from her brow. "They always overthink the foam," she says, almost to herself. You're beginning to realize that brew day is less a precise chemical process and more like directing a family reunion with fire and grain. The ingredients may stay the same, but the real magic is in navigating all the voices that come with it. Somehow, by late afternoon, the pots have calmed. The mash simmers low and fragrant, rich with grain and heat. The courtyard quiets, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of a broom and the hum of a song you can't quite place. You glance at the foam again. It's behaving now, bubbling quietly. No more drama. You almost feel proud until the goat returns. It emerges from behind a stack of baskets with the stealth of a cat and the appetite of a drunk uncle. Before you can stop it, it dips its snout into the edge of a freshly stirred pot. You shout. Someone gasps. Takea curses in a language that might be made up just for this moment. The goat is shooed. The pot is inspected. Someone says it's fine. Someone else says the beer's now blessed by the wild. You aren't sure if this is a good thing. Still, the brewing continues. You stir a little slower now, a little more thoughtfully. You're starting to understand. It's not just about the flavor or the foam. It's about the ritual, the rhythm, the way this bubbling pot has a way of pulling in people, of fermenting memories as much as grains. By evening, the heat of the day gives way to soft shadows. A few stars appear above the courtyard. The brew bubbles low and steady, as if it's finally ready to be left alone. And Takea, she leans back, stretches her arms, and smiles. Now we wait. You glance at the goat, who is eyeing you smugly from the far end of the yard. Maybe wait with one eye open. The brew is now in its patient phase. What Takea calls the don't poke it, don't rush it, don't even look at it funny stage. The pots have been removed from their shallow fire pits and wrapped gently in woven reed mats, like babies swaddled for a long nap. They rest now in the shaded corner of the courtyard, quietly fermenting. And you're finally allowed to breathe. Not that it's exactly restful. The entire process of Nubian fermentation is equal parts waiting and worrying, and Takea, though calm on the outside, is watching those pots like a hawk with insomnia. She's seated on a low stool, idly stripping husks from a dried okra bundle, but her eyes keep drifting to the clay jars. "You can't rush bubbles," she mutters, as if it's an ancient proverb. Maybe it is. At this point, the yeast, wild and invisible, is doing its work. It's eating the sugars from the malted emmer, producing alcohol and gas. You'd never know it from looking, but down in those pots, a quiet storm is brewing. Historians still debate whether Nubians used wild ambient yeast or stored a kind of starter culture from batch to batch. There's evidence of fermentation jars being reused for years, even decades, which would naturally preserve yeast colonies inside their porous walls. And Takea? She claims her family's oldest pot still knows how to make a proper buzz. You don't doubt it. The village is slower now. Most people have retreated indoors to escape the heat. The goats, mercifully, have disappeared. Even the chickens seem too tired to argue. You sit with your back against the wall, eyes on the reed mats, listening to the occasional soft plop as a bubble escapes the thick surface of fermenting grain. You try to imagine what this must have felt like centuries ago, during the height of the Kingdom of Kush. Not in some modest village, but in grand settlements like Kerma or Napata. There, fermentation likely happened on a larger scale. Multiple pots, larger courtyards, and possibly even state-sponsored beer for workers, soldiers, or temple rituals. One fringe theory, still hotly contested, is that Kushite temples had brewing priests, specialists responsible for producing sacred beer to offer to gods like Apedamak or Amun. These were not just beverages. They were prayers in liquid form. And yet, even here, in this quiet courtyard, that sacredness remains. You feel it in the hush around the pots, in the way no one raises their voice too close to them, in the odd moment when Takea sprinkles a pinch of salt just outside the mat's edge. Not inside the pot, just on the earth near it. For the ones who walk unseen, she says. You pretend not to shiver. Later, just before dusk, the inspection begins. Takea lifts the edge of one reed mat and peers inside. The surface of the brew has changed. It's puffier now, full of tiny craters like the moon's polite cousin. She dips a spoon in and lifts a taste to her lips. She swirls it, squints, and then offers you a sip. It is strange. Warm, still thick, not fully alcoholic yet, but gently tart, with a flavor somewhere between sour porridge and something fruity left in the sun. You cough slightly. Takea just laughs. "You'll like it more tomorrow," she says. And here's the most endearing quirk. Some families name their batches, not officially, not out loud, but quietly, among themselves. Names like the Lucky Pot, Sweet Cloud, 3-Day Headache, or even Oops, Too Much Millet. Takea says this one might be Little Thunder if it behaves. You're not sure what happens if it doesn't. The last light of the day spills into the yard in golden ribbons. A group of young boys run past, laughing too loudly. Someone has started a small fire for dinner. You can smell lentils and onion drifting through the air, mixing strangely with the scent of fermenting grain. Takea finally leans back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of her. "Now we sleep," she says. "If the spirits let us." You glance toward the pots, now gently gurgling under their covers like old storytellers murmuring in their sleep. The stars appear slowly overhead, and one by one, lights in the village go dark. No street lamps, no traffic hum, just frogs in the reeds, the flicker of firelight, and the quiet companionship of something ancient working itself into being. You curl up on your reed mat, head resting on a folded shawl, stomach full of lentils and warm bread. The pots sigh occasionally, like they're dreaming too. And you sleep, not just in Nubia, but with it. You wake to the sound of a wooden ladle tapping gently against the side of a pot. A low, rhythmic tunk. Tunk like someone knocking politely on the door of a very sleepy neighbor. Takea is already crouched near the jars, removing the reed mats with a care usually reserved for lifting babies out of slings. The sun is still lazy this morning, dragging itself across the low horizon. The air is cool and damp, and the smell, the smell is unmistakable now. Gone is the grainy porridge scent of yesterday. In its place is something deeper, sour, fruity, yeasty. Beer is happening. You shuffle over, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and peer into the nearest jar. The surface is cratered and still bubbling faintly. Takea nods in satisfaction. "It spoke all night," she says. "Now it listens. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you nod solemnly anyway. This morning marks a subtle shift. Fermentation has progressed, and the beer is ready to move into its next life stage, the separation of liquid from solids. It's a messy, splashy affair, and Takea warns you to wear something you don't love. You grab a gourd ladle and begin scooping from the top of the pot into a wide basket lined with finely woven palm fiber cloth. The liquid trickles out slowly, filtering through the cloth and into a collection jar placed just beneath it. The spent grain stays behind, thick and clumpy like wet dough. It's sticky, a little sour-smelling, and still warm to the touch. "Don't waste it," Takea says, already spooning some of it into a small bowl. "Makes good bread, or goat food, or if you're desperate, cousin stew." You're really hoping that last one's a joke. Historians still argue whether the Nubians filtered their beer for clarity or preferred it chunky. Evidence suggests both existed. Some styles were fully strained, others left thick and porridge-like, more a meal than a drink. One archaeologist even found strainers made of palm fiber pressed into ceramic vessels, hinting at a deliberate method of separation. Today, Takea's brew is going to be light-bodied, as far as ancient Nubian beer goes. Something drinkable, something shareable. She hums to herself as she pours the filtered liquid into fresh clay jugs, the color now a cloudy amber, soft and almost glowing in the early light. You take a tentative sip from a ladle. It's tart, earthy, slightly effervescent. Not sweet like modern beer, but still strangely satisfying. And cool, unexpectedly so, having sat in the shaded pit overnight. Don't drink too much, Takea says with a smirk. Still needs to sit. One more day if we're lucky. Half if we're greedy. Then she dips her ladle in again. This is where the ceremony begins. She walks the courtyard slowly, flicking small drops from the ladle into the corners. The ground, the door frames, the fire pit. Blessings, she murmurs. Thanks. Warnings. You're not entirely sure which is which, but it all feels appropriately sacred. Here's a fringe belief that might stay with you. Some Nubian brewers left a small offering of the first sip to the ancestors, often poured near the family granary. It wasn't just ritual, it was respect. Brewing, after all, was about life, sustaining it, remembering it. You carry a full jug into the cool interior of the house, where it will sit until sunset. The temperature in here is perfect, just cool enough to slow fermentation, just warm enough to keep the yeast happy. The walls are thick mud brick, the air smells of clay and cumin, and your arms are already tired from lifting. You sit in the doorway, watching Takea add finishing touches to the strained beer. A handful of dried hibiscus petals for color, a splash of fermented date syrup for depth. She's not following a recipe, of course. She's tasting the air, watching the light, listening for things you can't hear. You offer to help with lunch, which earns you chopping duty and a suspicious look. You end up slicing onions while Takea tells you about her aunt, famous in 3 villages for making a brew so strong a visiting merchant forgot his own camel. The afternoon passes in a warm haze of stories, laughter, and the occasional runaway chicken. The village begins to buzz again. People moving from house to house, news traded like lentils, and children playing a game that seems to involve both running and yelling at full volume for absolutely no reason. By evening, the jugs are cool, sealed, and settled. They sit like squat guardians in the corner of the kitchen, each marked with a smudge of ash to signify readiness. Takea grins and pats the nearest one. Tomorrow, she says, we drink. You look around at the courtyard, the reed mats drying, the empty pots scrubbed clean, the leftover mash already being formed into cakes for baking. Every bit used, every piece respected. And for all its chaos, the day has had its rhythm. Not mechanical, not planned, but alive. Like the beer, like the people. You lean back, stretch your arms, and close your eyes. Somewhere, one of the jugs gurgles. You smile. It's going to be a good batch. Morning brings with it a different kind of energy. Quieter, heavier, like the air itself is holding its breath in anticipation. The jugs in the corner, those clay vessels that just yesterday were warm and murmuring, are now perfectly still, their surfaces cool to the touch. Takea runs her fingers over the top of one and nods, solemn as a priestess before a ritual. It's time, she says. You're not quite sure if you're being invited to a celebration or a taste test, but either way, your stomach flutters with a mix of excitement and cautious curiosity. After all, this is the culmination of everything, from sprouting grain to flirtatious foam to silent fermentation. The beer is no longer potential. It is beer. The jug is lifted with care, carried to the center of the courtyard, like an honored guest. A low wooden table is wiped down and draped with a linen cloth worn soft by years of use. Around it, people begin to gather, quietly, naturally. No one is called, and yet within minutes, the space hums with gentle chatter and the scraping of stools being pulled close. A wide ceramic bowl is placed in the center, and the beer is poured. It flows in a steady stream, murky, golden brown, slightly viscous. It doesn't sparkle like the carbonated beers you know, but it has life to it, a subtle shimmer as it settles. Steam doesn't rise, but an earthy aroma does. Hints of grain, dried fruit, fermentation, and sun. And then come the straws, not the plastic kind, not even paper. These are drinking reeds, hollow and thin, cut from the river's edge and smoothed over fire to make them safe. Takea passes them out like ceremonial scrolls. You accept yours with both hands. You lean in. The first sip is surprising, tangy, almost lemony. Warm but refreshing. There's a sweetness tucked into the back of it, followed by a little bite of wild yeast. And beneath it all, something ancient. A flavor you can't describe, but which feels like it belongs to people who sleep close to the earth and always know where the sun will rise. You glance around. Everyone else is sipping slowly, eyes closed or gazing out at the far mountains. No one rushes. This isn't a drink, it's a moment. Takea finishes her sip and sighs. It turned out proud, she says. You nod, though you're not entirely sure what that means. You're guessing it's good? Historians still argue whether ancient Nubian beer was consumed daily or reserved for festivals. But archaeological finds of beer jugs in both elite tombs and village sites suggest that it spanned social classes. Beer wasn't a novelty. It was part of life. Sustenance, sacrament, social glue. Today, it's also lunch. Flatbread appears, still warm. A lentil stew is passed around, spicy and thick. There are fresh cucumber slices with crushed salt and a bowl of stewed figs so sticky they practically dissolve on your tongue. You eat with your hands, wipe them on your knees, and sip more beer. A story begins. One of the elders, an uncle with the kind of deep voice that seems to vibrate the floor, starts recounting a legend about a crocodile who learned to brew. According to him, it all began when the animal stole a half-buried pot of mash during a drought and returned it days later, with something much tastier inside. The villagers, amazed, built a shrine to the clever crocodile, whom they named Sebak, brewer of the flood. To this day, some still pour a little beer into the riverbank during dry spells. You glance at Takea. She shrugs. Not all stories are meant to be believed, she says. Some are just meant to be shared. Fringe tidbit. There are carvings, rare ones, showing what appear to be crocodiles and hippos in proximity to beer vessels. While most scholars dismiss this as symbolic, a few speculate that beer may have been offered to river deities, or even used in rituals to appease wild animals. You'd certainly offer something to keep crocodiles on your side. You take another sip, and with it you realize something odd. You're not drunk. The beer, while fermented, is low in alcohol, more a tonic than a trap. It warms you, it slows your thoughts, but it doesn't blur the world, it softens it, which makes sense. After all, this isn't beer for bar fights or ball games. It's beer for afternoons under trees, for storytelling and listening. Beer for remembering, and for forgetting just enough. The food is cleared slowly. The conversation wanders. Someone brings out a drum, soft and round like a worn-out pillow, and begins to tap it gently. A child curls up next to a jug and falls asleep. A cousin climbs the fence to rescue a wayward chicken who has, perhaps predictably, wandered into the neighbor's stew pot. And you? You're still sipping, still listening, still letting the beer teach you something you can't quite put into words. Takea stands and stretches. That's it, she says. We've made it. Tomorrow we clean. You laugh just a little, because of course, tomorrow always comes with chores. But for now, you lean back against the wall. Reed straw still in your hand, the scent of hibiscus and grain still on your breath. The beer is proud, so are you. The morning after, the drinking feels quieter, a little more deliberate, less like a celebration, more like the return to the ordinary. You rise slowly, your joints reluctant, your feet unsure on the packed earth floor. You're not hungover exactly, just gently fermented. Takeya is already outside, humming while scraping yesterday's dishes with a bundle of stiff grass stalks. A few goats eye the dregs of beer in a wide, shallow bowl near the cooking fire, clearly hoping for leftovers. Takeya ignores them. She's in cleanup mode now, which means you are too. First task, washing the brewing pots. It sounds simple, but these are no dainty teacups. The largest pot is wider than your arms can stretch, with a mouth like a cauldron and a base that's been stained the color of burnt amber. You fill it halfway with warm water and stir in a handful of crushed wood ash, a Nubian trick for scrubbing that Takeya assures you kills everything but your hands. The slurry fizzes faintly as you scrub with a palm fiber brush. The scent is smoky, mineral-rich, a little bitter. Your arms ache after 10 minutes, but there's something weirdly satisfying about seeing layers of dried mash melt away into soapy water. The pot, which once groaned with steam and bubbles, now slouches empty and quiet. You feel a little like you're putting an elder to bed. Historians still debate whether Nubian brewers used special vessels for beer alone or repurposed everyday cooking pots. Some evidence suggests that beer jars had unique ridges or markings, allowing brewers to identify the best fermentation vessels over time. Takeya claims to know which ones make talkative brews and which ones always sulk. She hands you a short broom and points to the floor beneath the reed-drying mats. Spilled grains crunch beneath your feet. A few ants scurry away as you sweep, probably offended that the party is over. In the corner, a small pile of discarded mash is being pecked at by a very persistent chicken. You think about the old stories, about offerings to gods, about sacred beers, and here's this chicken, making a sacred mess. Next comes the rinsing. Jugs are upturned and washed with warm water and mint leaves, not just to clean them, but to prepare them for storage. The aroma fills the courtyard, light and sharp, waking your senses in a way no alarm clock ever could. One jug rattles as you turn it. Something's inside. You reach in and pull out a small carved bead, probably from a necklace or a charm that fell in during the pouring. Takeya laughs. "Lucky batch," she says, "blessed with beauty." You don't question it. Some of the spent mash, now sun-dried and a bit crusty, is being mixed into animal feed. Another portion has been shaped into flat cakes and set on stones near the edge of the fire. "Beer bread," Takeya explains, "not for guests, for workers, or days when the stew is thin." You take a bite. It's dense, sour, nutty. Not exactly thrilling, but strangely satisfying. Like chewing on the memory of a good party. And then there's the beer itself, still resting in jugs, but now destined for barter. Two neighbors arrive late in the morning, each carrying a bundle of goods. One with a net of dried fish, another with a stack of cotton cloth dyed in deep indigo. Takeya inspects the goods without much comment, then nods and gestures toward two sealed jugs. A trade is made. No scales, no receipts, just years of mutual understanding and the slow dance of community currency. In this village, and others like it, beer is more than drink. It's payment, offering, apology, and celebration all rolled into one cloudy sip. Fringe historical theory. In some Nubian villages, brewers, especially women, were the central organizers of informal economies. They controlled flow, gossip, and goodwill. The kind of quiet power no monument ever honors, but every household depends on. You help load one of the beer jugs into a neighbor's basket. She thanks you with a smile, then offers a strip of dried mango as a small gift. It's leathery and tart, and somehow perfect. Takeya finishes wiping down the table. The courtyard looks empty now, like the day after a festival. Quiet, sunlit, a little lonely. She sits down beside you, drinks a cup of cold water, and fans herself with a woven mat. "We'll brew again in 3 days," she says. You blink. "That soon?" She nods. Beer doesn't wait, neither do people. You think back on the process. From soaking grain to chasing goats to sipping foam through reed straws. Each part ordinary, yet stitched together into something that felt timeless. You ask her why she brews, really. She considers. "Because I like the silence when people drink," she says. "It means they're happy. Or at least not fighting." Then she smiles. "You ready to help next time?" You grin. Your arms ache, your hands are raw, and you're still picking grain out of your hair. "Absolutely," you say. Late afternoon rolls in with the hush of heat settling over the village like a soft wool blanket. The brewing tools have been scrubbed and leaned against the mud brick wall to dry. The pots are now upside down, sun-warmed, and sighing out their last traces of steam. Even the goats, usually plotting something mischievous, are sprawled lazily under a neem tree. Takeya is inside the house now, sorting dried herbs and tucking them into little woven bundles. But outside, where the beer was born just a few days ago, you sit cross-legged in the shade, watching the neighborhood return to its steady rhythm. A boy rolls past with a hoop, giggling to himself as it clatters across the dirt. Someone in the next courtyard is singing a slow lullaby, low, mournful, oddly comforting. The song mentions golden jars, sunset-colored foam, and someone named Asha who drank too much and tried to marry a donkey. You don't ask. One of the neighbors pokes her head in. Not to buy beer this time, just to chat. She brings a small bundle of fermented goat's milk wrapped in cloth, a kind of Nubian yogurt that smells stronger than it looks. "You helped with the beer," she says, matter of fact. "You should learn what else goes with it." You thank her and set it aside. Maybe later. Right now, you're more curious about something Takeya said the day before. That beer doesn't wait. You think about that phrase as the sunlight shifts. What doesn't it wait for? Time? People? Celebration? Turns out it doesn't wait for weather either. By evening, the sky has shifted. The wind carries a different tone. Cooler, and not entirely friendly. In the distance, clouds gather over the ridge like gossiping grandmothers, dark and full of attitude. You glance at the jugs resting quietly near the back wall. Takeya steps outside, eyes the clouds, and clicks her tongue. "We need to cover the beer." You move quickly. Cloths are fetched, mats unfolded, pots nudged closer to the walls. Not because the beer is fragile, no, it's tougher than it looks, but because the rain isn't neutral. Rain carries stories, bugs, weird moods. One strong downpour could ruin a good batch, or at the very least change its flavor into something politely described as funky. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubians intentionally brewed different beers for wet and dry seasons. Some suggest that rainwater brewing was a rare luxury, thought to make beer lighter and more floral. Others believe it was completely avoided, associated with spoiled mash and fermentation gone wrong. The truth is probably both, and neither. Like most things in Nubia, it depends on who you ask. You work quickly, pinning down the corners of the cloth with smooth stones, brushing away leaves, double-checking that each jug is sealed. Takeya gives an approving nod, and then the sky breaks. It's not dramatic. Not yet. Just a soft drizzle at first. A hush. The kind of rain that makes everything smell like wet clay and roasted grain. You sit under the awning, legs drawn up, watching the dust turn to mud, and the chickens disappear under whatever shelter they can find. This is the kind of evening where stories happen. So Takeya tells one. She speaks softly, as if the rain might overhear and interrupt. It's a tale about a girl who brewed the perfect beer, so perfect that even the gods came down to taste it. But they drank too much, danced too wildly, and forgot to leave. The girl was stuck feeding them for a year until she tricked them by serving water in her old jugs. Disappointed, they left. And from then on, she brewed only on full moons, or when she was mad. You ask if it's true. Takea just smiles. Every brewer has a version, she says. Mine's funnier. You sip a little beer, just enough to feel its warmth. Rain taps steadily on the roof above, and for a long while, neither of you speak. It's a shared silence, the kind that settles into your bones, where even your thoughts start to sound drowsy. Then Takea speaks again. Tomorrow we check for sweetness. You blink. Sweetness? She nods. After the third day, the beer gets moody. Some jugs turn bitter, some turn sour, some turn sweet. It's like people. You won't know what kind they'll be until you've spent enough time with them. You glance at the jugs, all huddled together like students waiting for a grade. You wonder if one of them is secretly plotting bitterness. Probably that one in the corner. Fringe brewing belief of the night. Some families would assign emotional traits to their beers. The angry one, the flirt, the crybaby. They'd even say things like, "Don't give Auntie Merritt that one. She'll start talking about her first husband again." The rain continues, soft and steady. You lean back, breathing in the smell of damp earth, beer-soaked clay, and freshly crushed mint from earlier. You're not sure when the beer became more than a drink. Maybe it was during the stirring, or the foam incident, or the goat debacle, or now with the sky dripping gently around you and the beer sleeping under cloth. But you feel it. This isn't just history. It's something you've lived. By morning, the rain has stopped. The air smells washed, soft around the edges. Puddles still cling to the dips in the earth, and chickens tread carefully across the courtyard, their feet squishing with every step like reluctant bathers. The clay jugs, wrapped tightly in their cloths, have survived the storm. Takea, standing with hands on hips, inspects them like a general reviewing troops. You approach quietly, not wanting to spook anything, or anyone. This is the day of the sweetness check, and though no one says it aloud, it feels like a small ceremony. Takea's fingers move gently over the sealed lids, testing temperature and tension. She opens the first jug. The aroma escapes like a sigh. Warm, tangy, just shy of sour. She dips her ladle, takes a sip, then grimaces playfully. "Moody," she declares. "Jug 2 is better." Earthy, mild, a hint of date sweetness clinging to the back of the tongue. "Jug 3? You try it." Your eyebrows lift before your brain catches up. This one is delightful. It has body, almost creamy. There's something floral there, maybe hibiscus, maybe magic, and a fizz that dances across your tongue like it has somewhere to be. Takea nods, satisfied. "We'll keep this one for the next feast," she says. "It behaves like company's coming. One by one, each jug is tested, sipped, sorted. Some will be shared, others stored, and at least one, the sulker, will be poured out for the goats." Apparently, there's no saving a sulky batch. Even the chickens avoid it. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubians purposely created a range of beer profiles, sweet, sour, strong, or if variation was simply a result of wild fermentation. There's no recipe book, no precise measurement, just memory and instinct passed through generations. You suspect Takea could brew with her eyes closed and one hand tied. After the tastings, it's time for labeling. Not with ink or paper, of course. Each jug is marked with a specific smudge pattern. Ash for sour, red ochre for sweet, crushed charcoal for strong. It's a color-coded system that Takea says her grandmother invented, though you suspect the system is older than half the hills nearby. You help smear a little red ochre near the lip of jug 3. It leaves a satisfying streak, like you're crowning it. Then comes the sharing. Takea sets 2 sweet jugs aside and calls over a neighbor boy. She whispers instructions, ties a cloth over each jug, and sends him off barefoot, smiling. These deliveries, you realize, are as much about friendship as they are about thirst. In this world, beer is social currency, a liquid letter you deliver with a smile and a nod. While he's gone, you help Takea gather bundles of dried sorghum and millet to prepare for the next batch. The cycle, it turns out, never really stops. The beer finishes just as the next grain begins its journey. You ask her if she ever gets tired of brewing. Takea doesn't answer right away. She rinses out a bowl, runs her thumb over a crack near the rim, and shrugs. Some days, yes, she says, but then someone drinks a good one and smiles with their whole face. That helps. You think about that, about all the smiles a jug of beer has pulled from mouths tired of working, from hearts too dusty to laugh, about the way the first sip quiets a room. You've seen it happen now, not just once, but many times. The hush, the soft breath, the leaning in. Fringe tidbit of the day. Some believe ancient Nubian midwives used a specific sweet beer as part of their post-birth rituals, thought to ease pain, calm nerves, and help the body remember joy. No hard evidence survives, but oral traditions linger like soft footprints on wet earth. The neighbor boy returns, empty-handed but smiling, and Takea rewards him with a small dried fig. You catch the look on his face as he bites into it, the same look from the people sipping the sweet batch. Quiet delight. By midday, the courtyard is clean, the jugs labeled, and the grain bundles sorted. The sun has begun its daily march towards oppressive brightness, and Takea declares a shade break. You follow her to a narrow ledge on the north side of the house, where a bit of breeze always finds you. She pours the last of yesterday's drink. Just a little, slightly flatter, but still good. And you sip slowly, watching a lizard dart along the wall in search of nothing in particular. There's peace here. Not because things are easy or perfect, but because things have rhythm. Brew, ferment, strain, sip, share, clean, start again. You let your head rest against the wall and close your eyes, still tasting the faint sweetness on your tongue. Somewhere nearby, a child starts humming one of the brewing songs you've half learned without realizing. It loops lazily, like a lullaby for yeast. The sun climbs higher, but you stay where you are. You've learned how to wait. The next morning begins with a whisper rather than a clatter. You're up early, not because someone poked you with a broom this time, but because something has changed inside you. Brewing, it turns out, gets into your bones. You find yourself listening for the sound of shifting grain or the splash of water into clay, like your body's expecting to start the process all over again. But today isn't about brewing. Today is about what happens when beer leaves home. Takea calls it Market Day. Her tone is half reverent, half resigned. You get the sense that this is less of a party and more of a performance. She's been preparing since yesterday, setting aside 2 large jugs of sweet beer and 1 slightly stronger batch that smells like roasted fruit and ambition. You'll carry the light one, she says, handing you a jug that's probably still heavier than your entire torso. The market is just over the hill, less than a mile, but in Nubian heat and sandals fashioned from something suspiciously like old boat rope, it feels like a cross-country trek. Along the way, Takea chats with passing neighbors, all similarly burdened with baskets of figs, bolts of cloth, and small goats that look deeply unimpressed with the whole affair. As you crest the hill, the market unfurls before you, noisy and bright, like someone spilled a basket of humanity across the earth and just let it wiggle. Here, clay pots glint in the sun. There, bright spices puff up from bowls like little storms. A woman hollers about cucumbers that taste like dreams. A group of children chase a chicken that absolutely does not want to be purchased. And smack in the middle of it all, the beer circle. It's not marked, not formal, just a shaded area where brewers gather with their jugs, their reeds, and their reputations. Takea takes her place like a queen returning to court. You're mostly there for moral support, and also to not drop the jug. A man to her right offers a taste of his own brew. Darker, almost molasses-like. Takea sips, nods politely, but doesn't comment. Brewing etiquette, you learn, involves a lot of polite nodding and very little direct feedback. Unless, of course, someone's beer explodes. Then it's fair game. You help pour samples into tiny clay cups shaped like flower buds. People sip, nod, sometimes smile, and every once in a while, someone closes their eyes and just breathes. That's the gold standard, the silent exhale. You start noticing something else, too. Everyone's brewing style seems to reflect their personality. One woman, loud and flamboyant, makes beer that tastes like fire and mango skins. Another, shy and deliberate, brews a gentle, mellow drink that sits on your tongue like velvet. Takea's beer? It's confident, not flashy, but it leaves you thinking about it an hour later. Historians still argue whether beer brewing in Nubia was strictly domestic or semi-commercial. Some evidence points to trade, jugs found in distant regions, bartered goods, specific brewing marks. Others argue it remained intimate, household-centered. But here, in this market, the two ideas blend. Personal pride and public sharing. You spot a small booth nearby selling reed straws dyed with crushed hibiscus and pomegranate bark. Decorative and functional. Takea buys a few, hands you one, and grins. For when we get fancy, she says. The sun climbs and so does the laughter. By midday, several trades have happened. One jug swapped for dried fish, another for a bolt of indigo cloth, and someone even offers a carved wooden flute in exchange for just one cup of the sweet one. Takea accepts, probably because the flute matches her kitchen stool, or maybe because he complimented her brewing song. You ask her how she judges success on market day. She tilts her head. If people remember the taste tomorrow, she says, that's success. If they come back next week with an empty cup, that's legacy. Fringe fact for the day. In some Nubian markets, a brewer's reputation could influence marriage prospects. Brew a batch that wins hearts, and suddenly your second cousin gets 3 offers. Brew a disaster, and even the goats stop visiting. As the sun begins its slow descent, the beer circle starts packing up. Jugs are emptied or tied for transport. Takea accepts a few quiet compliments, a whispered request for a birthday batch, and one loud offer of marriage. Probably a joke, but possibly not. She declines with a wink. You haul your now lighter jug up the hill, your arms trembling slightly, and not just from the weight. You've seen beer move people, change their posture, tilt their mood, stir their memories. You've seen it make a space, a shaded circle in a wild market, feel like a village within a village. As you reach the top of the hill and glance back down, the market looks different. Smaller, somehow. Quieter, as if it, too, is winding down after a long, fermented day. Back home, Takea sets the jugs down and stretches her back with a groan. Next time, you carry the strong one, she says. You nod. You'd carry 2? By the time the stars flicker to life over the darkened rooftops, you've come to understand something simple but profound. Brewing beer is only half the story. The other half is how it's remembered. Tonight, Takea lights a small fire in the courtyard. Not for cooking, but for gathering. Around it, neighbors begin to settle in, uninvited but expected. They bring stools, stories, and a few musical instruments made from gourds and goat skin. One man carries a single-stringed lyre, plucking out sleepy notes as the flames dance. The atmosphere is thick with wood smoke and laughter softened by the kind of fatigue that only comes from a long day of bartering and pretending not to judge someone's weird mango spice brew. You help Takea bring out the last of the sweet batch. Just one jug, half full, the top sealed with linen, and a knot that looks suspiciously like a sailor's. She unties it and pours careful servings into clay cups for everyone. Nobody gulps. Everyone sips. There's a quiet murmur of approval. A few eyes close. A sigh here, a smile there. And just like that, the beer becomes a memory in progress. Stories start flowing faster than the drink. One man tells of a time he drank too much and mistook a goat for a Nubian princess. The goat was flattered. The princess, less so. A woman recalls a brewing competition where the winner's beer was so thick it had to be eaten with a spoon. She still claims it tasted like ambition, and porridge had a child. But then someone, an elder with sun-creased eyes and a voice like sand sliding over stone, asks a quiet question. Do you remember the storm feast? Heads nod, smiles widen. The storm feast, it turns out, was years ago, when the river flooded unexpectedly and trapped the entire village on one side of the crossing. With trade halted and tempers rising, someone, probably a Takea ancestor, decided the only logical response was to tap all the beer jugs and turn isolation into celebration. 3 days of drinking, singing, and telling stories under palm fronds and makeshift hammocks. By the time the waters receded, arguments had turned to marriages and strangers to cousins. No one remembers the exact year, but everyone remembers the flavor of that beer. Sweet at first, but with a wild afterbite. The kind of brew you only make once, or perhaps twice if the river gets sassy again. You sip slowly as the lyre player picks up a more upbeat tune. Feet tap. A few people hum along. Takea taps your shoulder. You're part of it now, she says softly. You blink. Part of what? She gestures around you. This, the remembering. Not everyone gets that. She's right. This isn't just a drink. It's an oral tradition in a cup, carried from mouth to memory, one sip at a time. And in Nubian culture, where written records fade in the heat and mud, stories are currency, preserved through the rituals of shared meals, shared brews, shared evenings like this. Historians still argue whether Nubian brewing techniques were standardized or unique to each household. Some point to regional clay markers and brewing songs as evidence of shared tradition. Others insist the recipes varied wildly. One family might favor fermented dates, another dried figs, another a mysterious seed you're still not entirely convinced is legal. Tonight, all those methods converge in the form of anecdotes. Everyone, it seems, has a favorite batch. A brew that was just the right amount of bitter, or so smooth it could convince a cat to herd itself. Some stories are likely exaggerated. Okay, most are, but no one minds. A fringe tradition mentioned, in certain mountain villages, elders were believed to bless a batch with a song, sung once into the open jug before sealing it. The idea being that beer, like children and goats, grows better with music and mild supervision. You close your eyes and lean back against the courtyard wall. The night buzzes softly. The beer warms your chest. Someone's retelling the goat princess tale with extra flourishes. Even the chickens seem to be listening. You smile. This is the final ingredient in every good brew. The retelling. The way a beer, once drunk, lives on in the curve of a joke, in a song hummed on the walk home, in a jug passed between generations like a family heirloom. Takea yawns and stretches. Same time next week, she says to the group. Everyone agrees, because when the beer is good, The story keeps going, and when the story's good, the beer only gets better in memory. By dawn, the embers in the courtyard have cooled, but the taste of the night still lingers on your tongue. Half beer, half story. Even the air feels slower, more contemplative, like it's nursing a soft hangover of joy. You're not expected to rise early, and yet you do, stirred by a strange desire to see what happens to the leftover beer. Takeya's already awake, of course. She's crouched over a low table, sorting through small clay lids and inspecting a row of sealed jars. Her brow furrows slightly. 3 jugs left, she murmurs, mostly to herself. 1 sweet, 1 bitter, 1 questionable. You take a seat beside her. The questionable one is bulging slightly at the sides, a clear sign that it's still fermenting more aggressively than expected. You offer to help, and she nods, motioning for you to grab a flat reed mat and set it in the sunniest spot of the yard. Today is for secondary fermentation, a phase you didn't know existed until 5 minutes ago. She explains it gently, in that sing-song tone reserved for both children and foreign guests. When a beer doesn't know what it wants to be, you let it sit in the sun and think about its choices. You try to suppress a chuckle. This second fermentation isn't about starting over. It's about coaxing depth from uncertainty. Some batches need that extra time to settle, to refine, to learn who they are. You wonder how many people you've met who could benefit from the same treatment. She uncorks the questionable jug. A small hiss escapes, and a hint of foam peeks over the rim like a curious squirrel. You both lean in. Sniff. Takeya says. It has potential. You help strain it through a woven grass funnel, a handmade tool whose fibers are seasoned with years of brewing. As the liquid trickles into a smaller jar, it shifts color. Less cloudy, more golden, like a hesitant sunrise. She adds a single dried fig to the mixture before sealing it again. For sweetness, she explains, and to distract the sour. Historians still argue whether Nubian brewers intentionally introduced fruit additives during secondary fermentation or if it was an improvised preservation method. Some claim certain flavorings were reserved for rituals or elite gatherings. Others argue it was purely about taste and availability. The truth, as always, probably bubbles somewhere in the middle. You carry the sealed jar to the mat and set it down with reverence. Takeya places 2 stones beside it, not for balance, but to mark its spot. Every brewer has a ritual. This one, she says, is to keep jealous spirits from tampering with your batch. Spirits apparently respect boundaries when those boundaries are made of riverstone. With the jars set and the sun climbing higher, there's little else to do but wait. So you sit, and while you wait, Takeya teaches you a brewing song, not the loud kind sung at feasts, a quiet one, a working song. It's repetitive and soothing, with a rhythm that mimics the motions of stirring, straining, waiting. You hum along, learning the words by feel more than understanding. Some verses reference ingredients, others moods. One line stands out. Let bitterness sleep until the sun softens its edge. You nod. That's a line worth remembering. The morning passes slowly, peacefully. Birds flit between clay rooftops. A breeze stirs the palm leaves overhead. The fermentation jar makes the faintest glug sound now and then, like it's muttering something under its breath. You resist the urge to whisper back. Then Takeya leans close. Do you want to try something strange? The correct answer is always yes. She vanishes inside the house and returns with a small black jar, sealed with wax and tied shut with what looks like horsehair. She opens it delicately and pours out a thick, dark syrup that glistens in the sun. Date molasses beer, she announces. Almost never made. Too sticky, too moody. But she trails off and hands you a tiny cup. You sip. It's like drinking the idea of warmth. Rich, earthy, vaguely spiced. The kind of flavor that doesn't sit on your tongue, It reclines, stretches, and gets comfortable. You glance up at Takea, who's watching you with an almost smug smile. "Too much work," she says, "but worth it once in a while." Fringe brewing note. It's rumored that some ancient Nubian priests brewed syrup-thick beers for moon festivals, drinks so heavy they were eaten with spoons, used sparingly to induce visions, or, at the very least, naps. You finish your cup slowly, each drop a small event. Then you glance back at the fermentation jar. It's still sunbathing, still deciding what kind of beer it wants to become. You relate, because after days of stirring, straining, singing, and sipping, you've started to feel like you, too, are being brewed. Slowly, gently, with intention. Afternoon arrives not with a bang, but with a yawn. The kind of yawn that drifts on warm air and wraps itself around your shoulders like a sleepy scarf. Somewhere nearby, someone is pounding grain, each soft thud a heartbeat echoing across the sunlit rooftops. The fermentation jar hasn't exploded, which you count as a personal victory. Takea is weaving palm fibers now, twisting them into a new basket. Her hands work automatically, a motion so practiced it's almost a trance. You sit beside her, watching as the sun draws slow-moving shadows across the courtyard. "You've earned something today," she says without looking up. "Come." You follow her into the storeroom, ducking beneath a hanging rack of dried herbs. In the back corner, behind a cloth-covered shelf, she reveals a small wooden chest. Inside, beer, but not just any beer. "This," Takea says with mock gravity, "is the ancestor batch." The jug she lifts is smooth and worn, its surface etched with generations of careful fingers. The lid is sealed with beeswax, and tied around its neck is a strip of blue-dyed linen. She holds it like it's a sleeping child. "You don't drink this on just any day," she says. "You drink this when you need to remember someone." You help carry it back to the courtyard, careful not to jostle it. Once seated again, Takea pulls out 2 tiny cups, ceramic, mismatched, probably older than either of you can guess. She breaks the seal and lets the scent rise. Warm, woody, with notes of something sweet and almost peppery. She pours. You sip, and it's like history walks up and sits beside you. The flavor is deeper than anything you've tasted so far. Aged, yes, but not stale. Rounded, thoughtful. It has an almost smoky complexity, like the ghosts of old fires and older kitchens have left their fingerprints on the taste. "Every family keeps one," Takea says. Or should. Historians still argue whether intentional aging of beer was a recognized practice in ancient Nubia, or if such aged jugs were just forgotten and later treasured by accident. Some suggest certain families may have aged beer for special rites or funerary offerings, while others believe beer was always meant to be consumed fresh. In Takea's house, though, the tradition is clear. You keep one jug, sealed tight, hidden away, until a story needs retelling, or a memory needs inviting back. She tells you the story behind this one. It was brewed the year her mother died. The rain came early that season, washing away the last of the sorghum before they could harvest it. Spirits were low, but someone insisted, maybe an uncle, maybe a stubborn neighbor, that they brew anyway. They salvaged what they could, mashed in what little they had, and added dried fig skin for sweetness. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They drank a little, stored the rest, and every year since they've opened it, just a sip, on the same day. Not to mourn, but to remember how it felt to choose joy when joy didn't come easy. You take another sip. It lingers. It hums. Fringe brewing belief of the afternoon. Some Nubian brewers would whisper secrets into their sealed jugs before aging them. The idea was that the beer would hold the memory, ferment the emotion, and return it to you years later. Mellowed, softened, wiser. You ask if that's true. Takea shrugs. Sometimes I sing into mine, she says. Same idea. You look at the half-empty ancestor jug, suddenly aware of how much it holds. Not just liquid, but time and story and grief and strength. You help her reseal it. Not all the way, just enough to say, not yet done. The sun tips westward, shadows stretch longer, and the courtyard feels quieter than before. Not solemn, just settled. Takea begins weaving again. You hum the brewing song under your breath, the one you learned the day before. This time, you understand a few more words. Let bitterness rest. Let sweetness rise. Let silence speak. Let the jug remember. The fermentation jar lets out a small burp behind you, as if to say, same. Evening slips in unnoticed, on the backs of long shadows and the hum of insects beginning their shift. The courtyard has cooled, and the smell of earth after a day of sun lingers faintly, like a memory no one quite recalls but everyone enjoys. You stretch your legs, still tasting the edges of the ancestor batch on your tongue. It hums gently. Tonight's task is simple, Takea tells you. Scrubbing the brewing tools. You'd expected something a bit more glamorous, perhaps more singing, or a mysterious herb. But this is the unspoken truth of any ancient tradition. Someone has to do the dishes. She brings out the ladles, funnels, cloth strainers, and clay stirring pots. Each one bears the markings of long service, worn handles, darkened rims, and faint impressions left by fingers decades old. Some have names: Old Stirrer, Lucky Funnel, and one cloth that is, without irony, referred to as the Strainer of Regret. No one will tell you why. You sit beside a shallow basin of water warmed by the sun and begin scrubbing. Takea shows you the correct way to twist the cloth, always clockwise, never wrenched. Brewing tools, she says, remember how they're treated. A warped ladle leads to bitter beer. A cracked jug leads to gossip. As you work, she shares stories of famous brewers from other villages. One who could identify fermentation stages by smell alone. Another who once brewed a beer so strong it convinced two feuding families to share goats. There was even, she claims, a woman who taught her beer to hum by leaving it near singing wells. Whether true or not, the tale sits comfortably beside the day's heat. Historians still argue whether brewing roles in Nubian society were gender-specific. Some say it was women's work, tied to hearth and household. Others suggest communal or even male-dominated practices in certain regions, especially where brewing was commercial. But Takea doesn't fuss about theories. In this house, she says, the beer listens best to me. Halfway through the cleaning, she uncovers something wrapped in faded fabric. A carved paddle, small, meant for mixing fine powders or delicate batches. Its handle is etched with tiny symbols. Nothing grand, just quiet patterns like waves and stars. She runs a thumb over them. My grandmother used this, she says softly, only for special brews or for teaching. You ask if she'll ever use it again. She considers. Maybe, she says. Or maybe I'll pass it on to someone else who listens well. You scrub a little more carefully after that. As the tools dry, laid out in neat rows like sunbathers, Takea sets out a small bowl of leftover brew and begins to paint designs onto the jug lids. It's a finishing touch. Functional, sure, but also aesthetic. The lines are simple. Spirals, crosshatches, palm fronds, birds. She hums softly as she works. You ask if the symbols mean anything. Only to me, she replies. That's what makes them work. She paints one tiny spiral onto your thumb. Now you've been marked by the batch, she says. You'll dream in foam tonight. You both laugh. But secretly, you believe her. Fringe brewing fact. Some Nubian brewers would paint messages on their jugs not for decoration, but to confuse spirits. The idea was that a demon or jealous neighbor couldn't spoil a batch if they couldn't read which jug was which. Visual misdirection as spiritual security. As darkness settles in fully, the courtyard feels still. Takea lights a lantern, low and warm, and begins organizing her tools for the next cycle. She moves quietly now, with the focus of someone who knows the value of repetition. Because brewing isn't about novelty. It's about the rhythm. Clean, dry, seal, wait, listen. Brew again. You ask if she's ever tried a new recipe, something wild, maybe with cinnamon bark or that odd berry the kids throw at goats. She smiles. Once. Turned out red. Not bad. Not beer. That feels about right. As the last tool is set aside, Takea pours 2 small cups from a recently cooled batch. Light, fizzy, floral. The kind you drink at the end of a long day when your muscles are tired, but your heart is content. You clink cups gently, not to toast anything, just because it sounds nice. Then you sit in the courtyard, beneath a sky turning deep blue, not doing much of anything at all, because the beer's been brewed, the tools are clean, and for tonight, that is enough. The next morning starts with a whisper of smoke, and the faint clink of clay jugs. You wake to find Takea already busy, again, roasting grain over a low flame. She hums softly to herself, barely louder than the breeze, as the scent of toasted sorghum drifts lazily across the courtyard like an edible fog. Today, she tells you, is about experimenting with flavor. You blink blearily, still adjusting to the idea that beer, something you've come to understand as earthy and humble, could be played with like a song or a soup. Takea, however, has other ideas. She sprinkles something reddish-brown onto the roasting pan and gestures for you to guess. Cumin? You try? She snorts. Try again. You sniff. The scent is strange, peppery, warm, but almost sweet underneath. Turns out it's ground baobab seed, toasted and crushed. Supposedly it lends a nutty, slightly sour undertone to beer, perfect for clearing the tongue, as she puts it, or for pairing with goat stew, which you are less excited about. She pours the toasted grain into a waiting clay bowl, fans the steam away with a woven paddle, and lets it cool. This is no regular batch. This is a flavor brew, designed not for mass sharing, but for teasing out new ideas. Think of it as Nubian microbrewing. Long before mustaches and ironic pub signs, you help grind a few dried date pits next, using a mortar so well used the stone has been smoothed like river pebbles. She mixes the powder with warm water, just enough to wake up the sugars. The resulting paste is stirred gently into the base grain. This is where the fun begins. You try a few other additions. Some honeycomb wax for body, a bit of dried hibiscus for color, and just a touch of fermented fig syrup to give it drama, Takea insists. The mixture smells like a fruit stand at sunset. Sweet, tart, with the potential to turn curious or completely regrettable. Historians still argue whether flavored beers in ancient Nubia were regular fare or reserved for festivals. Some remnants suggest spices, fruits, and even flowers were added to mark special occasions, harvest feasts, births, or the successful fending off of crocodiles. Others argue daily brewing was creative by necessity. You use what you have, especially when what you have is weird and growing in the shade behind your house. Once the mixture is ready, Takea pours it into a small jug, no bigger than a toddler's smile, and seals it with a leaf-wrapped plug. She doesn't expect greatness, just potential. Most experiments are bad, she says with a grin, but every now and then, you invent joy. You glance toward the older, more traditional batches drying near the far wall. They sit there like wise elders, watching this new upstart with amused skepticism. You feel the same. While the new brew naps, Takea decides it's time for a brew tasting walk. This, you learn, is less a walk and more a series of intentional detours. You carry a gourd filled with a basic batch. Sweet, mild, nothing fancy. She carries a second flask with her fig syrup and sass concoction from yesterday. Together you wind through the village, offering sips to neighbors, workers, and one sleepy herdsman who accepts his drink without opening his eyes. Each reaction is a clue. The tailor shrugs at your gourd, but smiles unexpectedly at the fig batch. The butcher thinks yours is safe and calls Takeya's confusing but handsome. A group of children declare both weird and demand milk instead. By the end of the walk, you've gathered more than opinions. You've collected palette maps, notes about who likes what, when, and why. The village, you realize, isn't just a place to live. It's a tasting panel with sandals, fringe belief. Some Nubian brewers were known to tailor their recipes to the emotional climate of their community. If there was unrest, they made calming beers. If there was celebration, they brewed bold and spicy. Some even made quiet, nearly flavorless batches to let the tongue rest between years. By late afternoon, the experimental batch has begun to bubble softly. A good sign. Takeya nods approvingly, but you both agree it still needs a night to think about itself. You sit near the jug, watching it like it's a sleeping baby. Occasionally, it lets out a gentle blurp. You imagine it dreaming of becoming something legendary. Or, Takeya says, it'll taste like foot water and we'll feed it to the chickens. You shrug. Either way, it's progress. Because experimentation, like brewing, is about patience, curiosity, and a healthy tolerance for failure. Not every batch is a masterpiece, but every batch teaches you something. About balance, about boldness, about listening to your nose. You lean back, the air warm against your skin, and close your eyes to the quiet sound of fermenting potential. And for the first time, you wonder what your own brew might taste like. When you open your eyes, the sun has dipped low enough to cast everything in a dreamy amber hue. The courtyard glows like the inside of a clay jug, warm, round, and full of quiet possibility. The fermentation jar from the day before now rests in a shaded nook, no longer bubbling, just settling. Takeya pokes her head around the corner, holding a bundle of cloth in one hand and a deeply suspicious smile in the other. It's your turn, she says. You blink. To do what? To brew. You look around, waiting for a punchline. None arrives. Instead, she drops the cloth bundle in front of you, revealing a starter set. A small clay jug, a stirring stick, a bit of dried yeast cake, and a handful of roasted sorghum. I'll supervise, she adds, already sitting back with a cup of something cool and fizzy. So begins your first solo brew. You start by measuring the grain. Carefully, methodically, pretending to know what you're doing. Takeya watches you like a cat judging a toddler tie its shoes. You add water, just enough to make a loose mash, then stir gently. The sound is calming. Soft sloshes, the wooden stick ticking against the jug's rim, the distant caw of a lazy bird who clearly doesn't believe in your brew yet. You sprinkle in the yeast, which looks less like magic and more like flaked clay. You stir again, clockwise, because now you know better, and cover the jug with linen, tying it shut with the confidence of someone who has no idea what will happen next. Now, Takeya says, you wait. You ask how long. Until it smells curious, which, admittedly, is not a time unit you've used before. As the brew rests, you jot down what you've done. Takeya provides a flat shard of pottery and a stub of charcoal, ancient Nubian record-keeping at its finest. You scratch a few marks onto the surface. A grain symbol, a date, maybe a question mark, just to be honest. Historians still argue whether brewing notes were kept consistently in Nubian culture. Some excavations suggest potsherds with brewing symbols or ingredient notations. Others believe most knowledge was passed orally, relying on memory, rhythm, and repetition, rather than a written recipe card. Takea shrugs when you ask her. Some things you remember because they worked, others because they exploded. She hands you a second shard. Draw something. For the next brewer. You hesitate. Then sketch something that looks vaguely like a goat, vaguely like a jug, and very clearly confused. You label it. Hopeful. By the time evening fully settles in, your batch is doing exactly what you'd hoped, not exploding. It lets out a slow, respectable glug, and you allow yourself the smallest flicker of pride. Not bad for a first try. Not great, probably, but not tragic. Takea offers a celebratory cup of an older batch, something balanced, mellow, the beer equivalent of an approving nod. You sip slowly and ask what happens if your batch turns out awful. Then you try again, she says, and again until the beer stops laughing at you. She tells you about her first brew, which she insists smelled like feet and regret. She fed it to a rooster who still won't look her in the eye. But she kept brewing, kept experimenting, kept listening, because that's what brewing is. Not a recipe, but a relationship. You watch your little jug, nestled in a corner like it belongs there. It's quiet now, not inert, just contemplative. Brewing, you're beginning to see, is less about instructions and more about tone. Like a conversation between grain and time, water and air. Your job is just to listen, and wait, and try again. Fringe brewing belief. In some Nubian households, first-time brewers were blessed by elder women with a tap on the forehead using a wet stirring stick. The water symbolized the river's patience. The stick symbolized, well, a stirring stick. Not everything needs to be poetic. You ask Takea if that's a real thing. Without a word, she dips a stick in water and boops you on the forehead. There, she says. Now you've been approved by the spirits, or at least by me. You grin. The stars begin to gather above like seeds spilled across the sky. The moon rises slow and round. Somewhere, a distant dog howls. Your brew is still. Sleeping, maybe. Or dreaming. You hope it dreams well, because tomorrow you'll taste what you've made. And whether it's good or terrible, one thing's certain. You're a brewer now. You wake with a start. Not to the sound of danger, but to the peculiar silence of a courtyard that's waiting for a verdict. Your little clay jug rests where you left it, swaddled in linen and soft hope. The air is cool, just barely touched by dawn, and the palm shadows stretch long like yawns. Takea is already up, of course, sipping tea and eyeing your jug like a cat eyeing a new slipper. Moment of truth, she says. You sit beside the jug, suddenly aware of how fragile the moment feels. This isn't just tasting beer. This is opening a conversation with the past 24 hours of your life and asking, were you worth it? With great ceremony, you untie the lid and peel it back. A faint shh of gas escapes, polite and apologetic. So far, so good. You sniff. Not bad. Earthy, a little sour, maybe a whisper of fig that didn't quite commit. You pour. The color is cloudy but not hostile. A soft amber, like forgotten sunlight caught in a dusty room. You sip. In certum. Well, it tastes like effort. Honest, fumbling, beginner's effort. Slightly too sour, a bit watery, but it's drinkable. Takea tastes it, nods once, then twice. Doesn't spit it out. You've survived your first brew, she declares. Your jug shall not be exiled to the chicken yard. Victory. She raises her own cup in a small, teasing toast. To almost sweet beer and humble beginnings, historians still argue whether Nubian brewing apprenticeships followed formal mentorships or emerged organically through observation and repetition. Some anthropologists point to brewing circles, small informal gatherings of women who brewed collectively, passing on tips and tweaks through action rather than instruction. Others suggest that elder-led rituals involving tasting ceremonies and symbolic blessings marked milestones in a brewer's development. Either way, today you feel initiated. Takea pulls out a fresh jug and hands you a bit of the leftover roasted grain from yesterday's flavor experiment. "You get to try again," she says, then pauses. "But this time I want you to change something." You blink. "What?" She shrugs. "Anything." And so you do. This time, you decide to alter the roast, just slightly. You toast the grain longer, listening for that particular crackling sigh that Takea calls the grain giving up. The smell changes too. Deeper, almost nutty. You add a pinch of dried coriander leaf, crushed between your fingers, mostly out of curiosity. And when you stir, you try humming the brewing song she taught you. But slower, your own rhythm. More like a lullaby than a work song. You've started to understand that brewing is a kind of personal expression, as much as it is a craft, fringe practice. In some Nubian circles, it was said that the best brewers could be identified not by their recipe, but by the feel of their batch. People would taste it and say, "This one tastes like grief," or "This batch feels like a new baby," or "Ah, the love brew." Slightly desperate, but very sweet. You wonder what your beer tastes like to Takea. She doesn't say, but she does help you cover the jug and places a small shell on top. For luck, or maybe for style, the afternoon rolls in with lazy heat and the soft chatter of neighbors. A woman drops by with a basket of tamarind pods and trades a few for a sip of yesterday's fig-heavy brew. A boy delivers a message from his grandmother. "Tell the foreigner that if his beer gets better, she'll trade him a song." Says, "You beam," Takea snorts. As the day drifts forward, you prepare a tasting slate. A small table with 4 cups. Yours, Takea's fig brew, the ancestor batch, and the mystery jar from earlier in the week. One by one, people drift in. Some stay. Some sip and wander off muttering. Some offer critiques like, "It's warm in the front, but shy in the back," or "This one makes me want to nap and forgive my cousin." Your own brew gets the following feedback. "It's not bad. It's better than last time. It's like an honest friend who talks too much." And finally, from the village elder who's rarely impressed. "It doesn't offend me." Success. The real joy, you realize, isn't just in being complimented. It's in the way people gather, slow down, and share space around your little jug. It's the community tasting itself through your hands. As the stars return, you notice Takea scribbling a mark on her pottery shard. A tiny dot next to an even tinier spiral. She doesn't explain. You don't ask. But later, when she hands you your own new shard, you understand. She's made room for your recipe, right beside hers. You're not just tasting history anymore. You're in it now. The moon is high, but you're wide awake, though not from worry. You're thinking about tomorrow, not because of chores or brewing or even chickens. No, tonight you're thinking about beer festivals. Yes, ancient ones, Nubian ones, small, local, slightly chaotic ones with singing, dancing, and a generous disregard for recipe consistency. Because tomorrow you're going to one, or rather helping prepare for one. Takea informs you that the seasonal Rain-Await festival is nearly here, an annual tradition where the village comes together to dance, eat, swap stories, and offer symbolic gifts to the river. It's not officially about beer, she says, but unofficially, it's entirely about beer. Today's task, helping brew a shared ceremonial batch, a community jug crafted from a dozen households' contributions, all blended together like a kind of fermented democracy. You're both excited and mildly terrified. You begin by gathering the offerings. A sprig of dried mint from the midwife. Crushed papyrus reed from a man with far too many goats. A lump of river clay from a child who insists it helps the foam stand tall. The resulting mixture looks like a questionable soup and smells like someone accidentally cleaned a spice drawer with honey. Takea grins. Perfect. She explains that ceremonial beers are never supposed to taste perfect. They're supposed to taste like everyone showed up. Each ingredient tells a story. Each mistake is part of the flavor. You stir slowly, careful not to overmix. The clay vat you use is enormous, wide-mouthed, and covered in tiny thumbprints. People have been using it for years, maybe longer. Some of the prints are children's. One, Takea says, belonged to a woman who brewed in complete silence every time, except when she laughed, which was often and loud. Historians still argue whether communal brewing vessels were shared across generations or remade each season. Some archaeologists point to long-used ceremonial vats found near ancient Nubian riverbanks, their insides lined with residue from multiple decades. Others suggest the pots were often broken on purpose, especially if a harvest failed, a symbolic way of starting fresh. Takea leans toward the continuity theory. If a pot breaks, she says, you carry the dust into the next one. As the batch rests, you prepare the drinking cups. These are no ordinary cups. These are painted festival gourds, dried and hollowed and decorated with symbols like rain, grain, river fish, and once, a very angry cat. Your job? Refresh the symbols. You sit in the shade with a bowl of red ochre paste and a brush made of bundled palm fronds. Your lines aren't perfect. One of your fish looks like a surprised eyebrow. But the act is calming, meditative. It feels like painting with intention, even if you're also humming under your breath and accidentally smearing your knee. Fringe belief. In some Nubian festivals, people would paint wishes into their drinking cups, believing that the right symbol could carry a dream into the beer, and the beer into the sky. One popular motif? A crescent moon inside a jar, meant to ask for clarity during sleep. You try your hand at one. Yours looks more like a banana in a bowl, but you're sure the spirits will understand. By midday, the ceremonial beer is ready for first taste. Takea calls in a few neighbors, old, young, sleepy, suspicious, and begins ladling out small samples. The air fills with commentary. Tastes like yesterday and ambition. Is that mint or did a leaf fall in? I'm confused, but pleasantly. You hand out your cup and brace for feedback. A man sips and says, feels like a try-hard, but a lovable one. You beam. By late afternoon, the singing starts. Low at first, like a warm-up. A few women testing harmonies, some children clapping offbeat. Then the rhythm catches, like dry grass finding flame. Takea lifts her jug, your experimental fig brew from days ago, and begins passing it around. Each sip is a cue. Each voice adds to the mix. You sit in the shade, drum your fingers on your knees, and for the first time in days, you don't worry whether your brew is good. You just want it to join the song. Historians may debate details, ingredients, timelines, techniques, but no one argues that beer in ancient Nubia was more than a drink. It was memory, celebration, survival. A story you told with grain and water. You close your eyes, listening. Your story's in there now, too. The morning of the festival arrives on a wind that smells like distant rivers and ground spices. You wake not to silence or clinking jugs, but to laughter and the low thrum of a drum being tested somewhere just out of view. It's already warm, but the kind of warm that's hopeful, not heavy. Today is the day the village toasts the sky, and maybe if the sky is in a good mood, it will toast back. Takea is already halfway dressed in her festival shawl, a faded ochre wrap embroidered with fish scales and grain stalks. She ties it like a breeze. Quick, loose, and full of memory. Big day, she says with a wink. Time to make sure your beer behaves in public. You gather your batch, the latest one, fig-balanced, coriander sprinkled, a little too proud of itself, and pour it carefully into a freshly painted gourd. You've added your own mark now, a crooked spiral surrounded by 3 dots. Outside, the village feels like it's woken into celebration. Palm fronds hang from doorways, chalk patterns are drawn across thresholds, and the air carries scents you can't fully place. Sweet, smoky, and just a little chaotic. At the heart of it all stands the festival table. A long, low surface made from woven reed mats and upturned baskets. On it are jugs of every shape and size, some ancient, some new, some shaped like animals. Yours nestles in among them like a nervous cousin at a family reunion. Then the drum starts in earnest. People gather slowly, humming, chatting, pointing at the jugs like they're reading a strange, bubbly menu. Children run between legs, pausing only to steal palm sweets or to mock a particularly pointy jug. The first toast is poured by the village elder, whose gourd is so cracked it whistles when tilted. She raises it and says a few words about rain, about harvest, and about not accidentally drinking from the bowl meant for foot washing. Then she sips, sighs, and nods. The tasting begins. One by one, villagers approach the table, sampling sips and making faces of contemplation, delight, or gentle confusion. Your batch is poured by a neighbor you've never met, and within minutes you hear the verdicts. Not bad. It's got something figgy going on. Might pair well with moonlight. You don't even mind the one person who says, tastes like a thoughtful mistake. Honestly, that might be the most accurate review yet. Historians still argue whether ancient Nubian festivals prioritized brewing as central ritual or supporting act. Some believe beer was a sacred offering. Others claim it was the social glue, the way the community bonded before any actual rituals began. What's certain is that brewing wasn't incidental. It was intentional, intimate, and always deeply connected to the collective rhythm of life. Takea finds you watching the crowd and nudges your arm. Come on, you've got to do the river pour. You freeze. The what? It's simple. You walk to the river, say something worth remembering, and pour out a sip. You ask what happens if you say something dumb. She shrugs. Then the river gets a good laugh, and so you walk. It's not far, just a few dusty turns and one small donkey detour. And there it is, the river, shimmering like lazy silver. Everyone's been here before, but today it feels new. Ceremonial, a little sacred. You kneel, scoop a palmful of water, and drink. It tastes ancient, or maybe just sandy. Either way, it feels right. Then you raise your gourd, look into the sky, and say, may the next batch know when to be bold and when to back off. You pour. The river takes it like a secret. Fringe tradition. Some Nubians believed the river could remember offerings, especially when poured during festivals. If you said something clever or poetic, it was said the river would bring it back to you in a dream, or in your next cup. Back at the village, the music has changed. Now it's faster, full of rattles and clapping and one enthusiastic flute. People dance, elders sway. A man does something that looks like both a twirl and a stretch, and almost drops his beer. Takea passes you a new cup, filled with a deep, earthy brew you haven't tried before. This one's from the next village over, she says. They say it makes you speak honestly. You sip. I may never leave, you murmur. She laughs. That's the brew talking, but it isn't, because you've come to love this place, not just for the brewing or the warmth or the calm rhythm of the days, but for the way the community moves like a living recipe, stirred together, left to rest, allowed to change. You close your eyes, hum along to the music, and imagine your batch someday being poured at this table by someone else. Someone who'll sip and say, tastes like the beginning of something. The festival lingers well into the night, but when the embers cool and the laughter begins to drift into memory. You find yourself back in Tekea's courtyard, quietly rinsing out your gourd. The sky is velvet now, heavy with stars. You hear the last faint drumbeat far off across the village, like a heartbeat slowly calming after a long, joyful run. Tekea sits beside you, holding a cup of the last remaining fig batch. She doesn't speak at first, just sips. You do the same. There's nothing left to prove. Just the quiet companionship of two brewers under a Nubian sky. You did well, she says finally, as if commenting on the weather. You shrug modestly, but inside your chest something glows. She looks at you sideways. You know, there's a rumor that brewers who survive 1 full moon and 2 full batches are allowed to name their own recipe. You raise an eyebrow. Allowed by who? She shrugs. The ancestors, the clay, the chickens. It depends who you ask. You think for a moment, then tap your cup. Hopeful, you say. I'll call it hopeful. Tekea nods. A bold name. It's a little sour, you admit, but it tries its best. Fringe superstition. In some Nubian regions, newly named brews were whispered to sleeping children or written on river stones and tossed into the Nile. The idea being that a named beer lives longer, even if only in story. Some people swore the river would remember the name and echo it back in waves. You make a mental note to whisper hopeful into the river tomorrow morning, just in case. The final task of the evening is cleaning the old brewing tools, wooden stirrers, woven strainers, clay cups with lip chips and faded ink symbols. You rinse each one slowly, like tucking someone in. You're not just washing away the grain and the foam. You're washing away the noise of the day, letting your hands carry out the last of the festival hum. Tekea shows you how to stack the cups mouth down on a warm stone so they dry without cracking. How to hang the cloths at a diagonal so they don't sour overnight. It's a quiet ritual, rhythmic in its own way. You find yourself humming without realizing it. Do you miss the place you came from? She asks suddenly. You consider it. The noise, the speed, the modern yeast that comes in neat foil packets and never smells like sweet hay. You shrug. Sometimes. But mostly I miss the idea of rest. She grins. Then you're in the right place. The stars overhead swirl like someone stirred the sky with a spoon. You lean back, feeling the cool clay beneath you, the still warm breath of the courtyard walls. A bat flutters by. Somewhere, a goat bleats dramatically, as though it too had a long day. You reach for the last bit of the fig brew, but Tekea stops you. She pours a small splash into the dusty ground. For tomorrow's brew, she says. You smile. Brewing forward, always. Historians still debate whether ancient Nubians truly believed in brewing as a form of time travel, passing memory forward, ingredient by ingredient, cup by cup. But you've seen enough now to believe it might be true. You sit together a little longer. Then, Tekea stretches, stands, and disappears into her room with a yawn and a muttered threat to any scorpions who try funny business. You stay just a little longer, holding your warm cup and staring at your drying gourd. And when you finally rise and tip your last sip into the earth, you whisper to no one in particular, hopeful. The night stretches on, smooth and weightless, like cloth gently laid over your shoulders. You walk slowly across the courtyard, your feet brushing against soft earth, your breath in rhythm with the breeze. The stars above blink lazily, content to be watched without expectation. The tools are all cleaned now. The gourd rests beside the wall, still bearing the faded spiral and its soft fingerprint smudges. Even the chickens have settled into a suspicious sleep, their little dreams likely full of breadcrumbs and drama. The world quiets. The air, still warm from the sun, holds a whisper of yeast and grain. Barely there now, like a memory softening at the edges. You sit down one last time and close your eyes. In the stillness, you can almost hear it. Grain cracking over low flame, clay lids being tied down, the low glug of fermentation, like a heartbeat in the background. You remember the feel of wet cloth wrapped around a jug, the brush of ochre paint against your knuckle, the distant splash of the river accepting your small offering. You remember what it felt like to try something for the first time and not be great at it, and how that, somehow, was enough. Tomorrow the courtyard will wake again with roasting and humming. New grain will be soaked. Someone will paint a new fish, badly, and the jugs will start whispering again from cool corners and shaded shelves. But for now you rest. The earth has taken your stories. The river holds your name. And your brew, humble and odd and utterly yours, sleeps beside you. Let yourself drift with it. Let the night carry you. You've earned the quiet. Good night.